For 6 long years, I lived with the comforting lie that my daughter was cherished in France. She always sounded tired on calls, but she insisted everything was perfect. Perfect husband, perfect in-laws, perfect life. But the moment I entered their luxurious Paris home, my world cracked. There she was, my daughter, Ilara Breton, on her knees, scribbing marble floors with trembling hands like a servant. Her eyes widened when she saw me, filled with fear instead of joy. And the worst part? Her husband's mother looked at me with a cold smile, as if this humiliation was normal, as if my daughter belonged on the floor. In that moment, I felt something burn inside me, a fury I had never tasted before. I didn't come to France to watch my child suffer. I came to take her back. But what I did next left their entire wealthy family shaken to the core. My name is Marielle Breton. I'm 57 years old, and I believed I had raised my daughter to live a life of respect and dignity. For 6 years, she lived in France with her husband, sending short calls and rushed messages that never truly felt like her. She always insisted she was fine, but a mother's heart recognizes silence louder than words. When she stopped sending photos altogether, I knew something was wrong. I booked a ticket unannounced, determined to surprise her and see the truth with my own eyes. I expected happiness. I expected a warm hug. But when I reached that mansion-sized home, the atmosphere felt strangely cold, like the walls were hiding secrets. I didn't know then that my daughter's pain was waiting behind the next door. The decision to visit France wasn't spontaneous. It was a storm building inside me for months. Ilara's voice had changed, becoming forced, mechanical, as if someone stood behind her during every call. When I asked for a video chat, she always refused, blaming bad Wi-Fi or busy schedules. A mother notices these things. My instincts screamed that something wasn't right. So I planned my trip without telling her, hoping my sudden arrival would reveal the truth she was hiding. On the plane, I rehearsed the moment she would run into my arms, relieved to see me. I told myself I was overthinking, that every mother worries too much. But deep inside, a heavy knot warned me that what I was about to discover would break my heart. 6 years is a long time to believe someone is living a beautiful life. I replayed every memory, her wedding, her excited voice when she first moved, the photos she sent of Parisian cafes and fancy dinners. They all looked perfect. But perfection can be a powerful disguise. Whenever I asked if her husband's family treated her well, she always replied quickly, as if someone was listening. "Yes, Mom, they treat me wonderfully." No stories, no laughter, just a script. The distance between us wasn't just geographical, it was emotional, a wall growing higher every year. I wondered who built it, her or the people she lived with. And facing that uncertainty aches more than any truth. When I arrived in her town, little details started to bother me. Her husband, Lucien's family, was wealthy. Everyone knew them. Yet not a single neighbor spoke warmly about them. Instead, they gave me polite, uncomfortable smiles, as if they knew something I didn't. When I took a taxi to the house, even the driver hesitated before dropping me off, muttering, "Be careful, they aren't what they seem." His words echoed inside me as I walked toward a massive gates. The house looked beautiful, but something felt off. Too quiet, too polished. A home should feel lived in. This one felt controlled. I rang the bell with shaky hands, preparing myself for anything, but not for what I would eventually see. The house was breathtaking from the outside. Tall windows, marble pillars, a garden trimmed to perfection. But as soon as I stepped inside, the air felt heavy. No laughter, no movement, no signs of warmth. It was like walking into a museum where emotions weren't allowed. Lucien's mother, Madame Corvel, greeted me with an icy smile, as if she were annoyed rather than surprised. She spoke slowly, measuring every word, her eyes scanning me like I was an inconvenience. The rest of the family appeared equally distant. Something was off. This wasn't how you welcome your daughter-in-law's mother after years. It was clear they didn't expect me, and perhaps didn't want me there at all. As I waited in the living room, I asked to call Laura, expecting her to run out excitedly. Instead, Madame Corvell said coldly, "She's occupied." My heart sank. What task was so important she couldn't greet her own mother? After a few tense minutes, I decided to look for her myself. Walking down the hallway, I heard faint scrubbing sounds, slow, exhausted, rhythmic. My chest tightened. I followed the sound, praying it wasn't what I feared. Then, as I opened the door slightly, I saw a small figure on the floor, tired hands scrubbing marble tiles. My heart stopped. Could it be? The moment Ilara looked at me, her terrified eyes told a story more painful than any words could describe. It wasn't the shock of seeing me. It was the fear of being caught seeing me. She quickly stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, whispering, "Mom, you shouldn't have come." That sentence alone broke me. A daughter happy in her home never says that. Her voice trembled, her shoulders stiffened, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if danger lurked right outside the door. When I reached out to hug her, she hugged me tightly, but her hands were shaking, as if she expected someone to pull her away. That's when I realized my daughter wasn't living here. She was surviving here. When Ilara led me back to the living room, the entire family stood waiting, stiff backs, forced smiles, eyes filled with judgment. Lucien's mother, Madame Corvell, suddenly switched to sugary politeness, acting like she hadn't just forced my daughter to scrub floors. She offered tea in an overly gracious tone, speaking loudly as if trying to control the narrative. Lucien sat with his arms crossed, assessing me like a problem he needed to manage. The entire atmosphere felt staged, every smile fake, every gesture calculated. Ilara sat quietly beside me, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes lowered. I noticed her flinch every time someone raised their voice slightly. Their hospitality wasn't kindness. It was a performance designed to hide the truth, and I wasn't buying a second of it. As I spent more time observing, the truth became clearer. This house didn't run on love, it ran on rules, strict, dehumanizing rules. Alara wasn't allowed to sit at the dining table unless invited. She had to wake up before everyone else to prepare breakfast. Her phone was restricted, her calls were monitored. If she spoke too softly, she was scolded. If she spoke too confidently, she was punished with extra chores. Lucien treated her like an employee, not a wife. Madame Corvell constantly reminded her of house expectations, reminding her that she came from a simple family and should be grateful. Every rule felt designed to break her spirit slowly. And the worst part? They had convinced her this was normal. That night, while the family was busy entertaining guests, I went looking for the restroom and accidentally entered a small storage room. What I found there made my blood boil. A detailed weekly chore schedule pinned to the wall with Alara's name written everywhere. Monday, scrubbing floors. Tuesday, washing all linens. Wednesday, attic cleaning. Thursday, yard work. Friday, deep kitchen cleaning. The list didn't end. No shared responsibilities, no consideration, just endless labor. My daughter was doing the work of a full housekeeping staff, alone. I took a picture of the board discreetly. This wasn't helping around the house. This was enslavement disguised as marital duty. And suddenly, everything made sense. Her exhaustion, her shaking hands, her shrinking voice. Later that evening, I overheard Lucien speaking to her in the hallway. His voice was sharp, arrogant, dripping with entitlement. "Did you embarrass us today? Did you act grateful in front of your mother?" he demanded. When Alara tried to defend herself, he stepped closer, towering over her. "Remember your place," he said coldly. My stomach twisted. This was the man she once described as gentle and kind. His true face was nothing but cruelty. When he walked away, Alara leaned against the wall, eyes shut. breathing shakily, trying to hold herself together. I waited until he was out of sight before hugging her silently. In that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't leaving France without my daughter. That night, I stayed in the guest room, but I barely slept. Every hour, I heard soft sobs coming from down the hallway, Ilara's room. She cried so quietly, as if she'd been trained not to make noise. I walked to her door and found it slightly open. Inside, she sat on the edge of her bed, hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking. I gently entered and she fell into my arms, whispering, "Mom, I'm so tired." She told me she hadn't slept properly in months. She wasn't allowed to eat until the family finished. She wasn't allowed to leave the house without permission. She had become invisible in her own marriage. Hearing her pain made anger rise in my chest, a dangerous, determined anger. The next morning, I witnessed Madame Corvel's full cruelty. She spoke to Ilara like she was a burden, criticizing her clothes, her posture, even how she breathed. When Ilara brought breakfast, Madame Corvel snapped, "You're too slow. Do it again." She had her remake the entire tray while the rest of us waited. Then she whispered to her, "You will never be good enough for this family." The venom in her tone shocked even me. It was clear she enjoyed breaking Ilara's spirit piece by piece. She kept Ilara busy with non-stop tasks, interrupting any moment we tried to talk. Her obsession with control wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. Watching this, one thought became unshakable. This woman had no idea what a mother could do when her child was suffering. That afternoon, when the family stepped out for a social event, I finally had a quiet moment with Ilara. The second the door closed behind them, she slumped into the chair as if her body had been carrying years of weight. She held my hand tightly and whispered, "Mom, they won't let me rest. Ever." She told me she wasn't allowed friends, wasn't allowed to work, wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone. Even her calls to me were monitored. She confided that if she didn't finish every chore perfectly, they would lock her phone away for days or force her to sleep in the cold storage room. Tears streamed down her face as she added, "I tried to leave once, but they threatened me." My heart broke, but my resolve hardened. With trembling lips, Ilara revealed the threats that kept her trapped. Lucien had warned her that if she ever tried to run, he would make sure she never saw daylight again in France. His father had told her that their family's influence could destroy her immigration papers, leaving her undocumented, powerless, and alone. And Madame Corvel had hissed that she would personally call the authorities to claim Ilara was unfit and mentally unstable. Hearing this made my blood boil, not just at their cruelty, but at how systematically they instilled fear in her. They didn't just want obedience, they wanted control so absolute that she forgot she had a life before this house. But she told me something else, something that changed everything. "Mom, they made me sign papers I didn't understand." Ilara explained how they slowly cut her off from the world. First, they discouraged her French classes, saying she didn't need the language because she'd only be managing the home. Then they took her passport for safety, claiming they would store it so she wouldn't lose it. Next, they insisted she delete all her social media accounts because married women shouldn't display their lives publicly. Even her phone was replaced with an old model so apps wouldn't work well. Every step was disguised as concern, but its purpose was clear. Isolate her, limit her, silence her. When she asked to visit me, they said flights were too expensive. When I tried visiting earlier, they blocked the idea with excuses. They didn't just isolate her physically, they isolated her emotionally, convincing her she had no one left. The final blow was when she explained how they trapped her financially. After marriage, her bank account was closed for convenience, and Lucienne took full control of all finances. Every purchase she made required approval. She wasn't allowed to have a debit card, and any cash she kept was taken away during house inspections by Madame Corvel. She had no way to travel, no way to communicate freely, and no way to escape. She told me about a time she asked for a small amount to buy skincare products. They refused and said, "A maid doesn't need luxuries." That word, maid, echoed through my mind. They didn't see her as family, not even as a wife. They saw her as labor, property, someone without a future. The family's manipulation wasn't just physical, it was psychological warfare. They often gaslit her, claiming her exhaustion was in her head or that she was overreacting. Lucien would belittle her dreams and mock her English accent, telling her she was lucky he married someone so plain. Madame Corvel sabotaged her relationship with neighbors by spreading whispers that Ilara was unstable, making sure no one would trust her if she ever asked for help. They also forced her to attend family gatherings where she wasn't allowed to speak, only serve. Every time she showed resistance or emotion, they labeled her dramatic and threatened to send her back in shame. Slowly, these constant attacks made her doubt her own worth, until she barely recognized herself. The worst moment came a week before I arrived. Ilara told me she had collapsed while carrying heavy laundry upstairs. Instead of helping her, Lucien scolded her for being weak. Madame Corvel made her continue working despite her dizziness. She spent the rest of the day in pain, crawling into bed only when everyone else slept. When she tried to call me that night, Lucien snatched the phone and locked it away. Hearing this broke something inside me. This wasn't neglect, this was deliberate cruelty. And when Ilara finished telling the story, she whispered, "Mom, I prayed someone would notice. I never thought it would be you." Her voice cracked, and in that moment, I realized the depth of her suffering. By the time Ilara finished revealing everything, my sadness had transformed into fierce determination. It wasn't just her mother, I was her shield, and I would not let these people destroy her any longer. I held her hand tightly and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." In my mind, a plan began to form. I wasn't going to shout or create chaos. I was going to dismantle this family's power with calm precision. I would gather proof, expose their abuse, and free my daughter from this gilded prison. They thought she had no one. They thought their wealth protected them. They thought her silence meant obedience. They were wrong, very wrong, because now they had me to deal with. I knew taking Ilara out of that house without proof would only put her in more danger, so I quietly began documenting everything. My phone stayed hidden inside my shawl as I recorded the way her husband, Fabian, barked orders at her like she wasn't even human. I captured her bruised wrists, the pile of chores dumped on her, and the way his mother, Somara, insulted her accent and appearance. That evening, when everyone went to their rooms, I found Ilara in the cramped storage room where she slept, and she broke down telling me everything. Each detail, no money, no freedom, no medical checkup, made my heart tremble with anger. I stored every recording, every photo, every voice note, preparing for the moment I would strike. The next morning, I walked straight into the living room where Fabian lounged like a king on his velvet couch. Ilara stood behind him, her hands trembling, prepared to be blamed for whatever I was about to say. But I stayed calm. I told him I knew everything, the forced labor, the emotional abuse, the threats. His smirk didn't fade. Instead, he leaned back and laughed, saying Ilara owed him discipline for the life he provided. I placed my phone on the table and played a recording of him screaming at her for eating without permission. His face drained. Somara rushed in, demanding I stop overreacting, but I didn't flinch. I told them both this wasn't a discussion, this was a reckoning. The moment the recordings played, chaos erupted. Somara tried claiming Ilara was weak-hearted and dramatic, but I countered every lie with evidence. Time-stamped videos, photos of bruises, and audio of her being insulted for hours. Fabian's father, Auric, who had always pretended to be neutral, stepped in trying to settle things privately, but I refused. Instead, I told them I already shared the files with 2 trusted people back home, meaning nothing could be erased or hidden now. Their faces stiffened with fear. They had spent years presenting themselves as a respectable, cultured French family, but now every veneer cracked. Alara stood beside me, straighter than before, watching her oppressors scramble like insects exposed to the light. I stepped outside, dialed France's domestic support helpline, and reported everything. The operator's calm voice only strengthened my resolve as I explained the situation, the withheld documents, the forced chores, and the emotional manipulation. Within minutes, I received instructions and was connected to a legal advisor who assured me Alara had strong grounds for immediate protection. When I walked back into the house, the family was whispering frantically, worried someone might hear. I informed them authorities were already aware, and the panic on Tavian's face was priceless. Ilara looked at me like she was seeing hope for the first time in years. I told her this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of reclaiming her life. By afternoon, a representative from a local advocacy group arrived after reviewing my evidence. She spoke to Alara gently, documented her statement, and confirmed that the family could face charges for abuse, coercion, and withholding her earnings. Tavian's arrogance shattered. He tried lying, then begging, then pretending he loved her, but nothing worked. The representative explained that Alara had the right to request emergency residence protection independent of her marriage. That shook them more than anything. Their entire power came from trapping her through paperwork and fear. Now, that grip was gone. Samar nearly fainted when she heard the possible penalties. For the first time since setting foot in that house, I felt victory inching closer. News spread fast among their upscale neighbors. When officers came to verify the report, discreet though they tried to be, the wealthy street noticed everything. Curtains shifted, whispers spread, and suddenly Tavian's polished reputation collapsed like wet sand. Oric tried bribing the officers. Selma attempted crying for sympathy. Nothing worked. The officers asked Alara simple questions, and her trembling but honest answers sealed the case. The family who once flaunted their sophistication and culture now stood exposed as abusers who treated their daughter-in-law like a servant. Ilara watched quietly, gripping my hand as the people who once made her feel small now shrank under public shame. Their downfall wasn't loud, it was cold, official, and irreversible. With temporary protection approved, Alara packed her few belongings, mostly clothes she bought with the coins she saved secretly. As she folded them into a small bag, her hands shook not from fear, but from disbelief that she was finally leaving. The officers escorted us to ensure no one interfered. Tavian tried one last time to block the doorway, demanding she act like a wife, but she stepped past him without a single word. That silence destroyed him more than any accusation. Outside, the cold French air hit her face, and she breathed deeply, like tasting freedom for the first time. I wrapped my arm around her as we walked away, leaving behind the house that once crushed her spirit. If you want to see how everything changed after this moment, make sure to hit subscribe, because what happened next turned our entire world upside down. Ilara stepped into the small Paris apartment with trembling hands, unsure if she even deserved peace anymore. I watched her eyes scan the room, simple, warm, quiet, so different from the mansion where she'd been treated like furniture. She hesitated at the doorway, almost expecting someone to shout orders at her. Instead, I placed my hand on her back and whispered, "You're safe now." For the first time in years, she took a deep breath without fear, sinking onto the couch as if rediscovering what comfort felt like. That night, she slept without being woken to clean floors or serve meals. But as she finally rested, I stayed awake, planning the next step, not revenge born from anger, but justice born from everything they stole from her. The next morning, Ilara gathered the courage to face the truth. She couldn't heal while still tied to the family who broke her. We sat together as she typed the message to her husband, short, emotionless, final. No explanations, no apologies, just freedom. When she pressed send, her hands shook, but her eyes carried a spark I hadn't seen in years. Within minutes, calls and messages flooded in, threats, guilt trips, desperate demands. She silenced her phone without hesitation. It was the first boundary she had ever set for herself. That moment wasn't just an ending, it was a rebirth. But little did we know, her husband's influential family wasn't ready to let her go quietly, and that made what came next was inevitable. I knew their power came from their image, so I attacked the only thing they truly worshipped. Using the evidence I collected, the videos, messages, schedules, and recordings of their cruelty, I sent everything to the right journalist. Within hours, the story exploded online. Wealthy French family exposed for domestic abuse, the headline screamed. Comment sections filled with outrage, disbelief, and demands for accountability. Ilara watched the news trembling, not from fear, but from shock that the world finally saw her truth. Her husband's mother tried releasing a statement, calling it all misunderstandings, but every lie collapsed under the weight of proof. Their perfect reputation shattered, and the silence inside our apartment felt like victory. As the scandal grew, the family's lawyers tried everything: denial, intimidation, counter-accusations, but every path led to the same brick wall: evidence. Their influence in the community crumbled overnight. Business partners distanced themselves. Neighbors whispered loudly. Invitations disappeared. Even the charity board suspended them pending investigation. For a family that lived off status, this downfall was devastating. Most shocking of all, Ilara's husband received an official notice demanding his presence in court. Watching him, once arrogant and untouchable, now scrambling to justify his behavior, was the justice I knew she deserved. Their wealth had insulated them for years, but not anymore. This time, truth was louder than money. For the first time in years, Ilara began rediscovering herself. She cooked food she liked, wore clothes she chose, slept when she wanted, small freedoms that once seemed impossible. Therapy sessions slowly helped her untangle the knots of fear planted by her in-laws. Some days, she cried without warning. Some days, she laughed unexpectedly. Healing wasn't a straight line, but it was hers. I watched her reclaim everything they tried to take: her voice, her confidence, her future. One afternoon, she said softly, "Mom, I finally feel human again." And that single sentence made every sacrifice worth it. Still, there was one more step she needed to take before her story truly closed. I recorded a message, not for the public, not for the courts, but for the family who believed their wealth gave them permission to destroy my daughter. Calmly, I explained everything they had done, every fear they planted, every bruise no one saw, every night she cried herself to sleep. And then I ended with one sentence they never expected. "You didn't break her. You taught her how strong she truly is." I sent it without anger, only truth. They read it, but for once, they had nothing to say. Silence from them felt more powerful than any apology they could have faked. It meant they finally understood. They lost. Months later, Ilara stood on her balcony, sunlight touching her face as she prepared for her new job interview. She wasn't the terrified girl I found on the floor. She was strong, steady, reborn. We had built a life they never imagined she could have without them, one filled with independence, dignity, and dreams they never allowed her to explore. Watching her step into her new beginning, I felt a pride deeper than anything I'd known. They tried to bury her, but she became the woman they feared she'd become. And as her future finally opened, one thing became clear: we didn't just escape, we won.